morning we're doing our program by audio alone due to a tropical storm hitting the Gulf Coast, but we wanted to communicate with you and get you caught up with all the things going on with coronavirus. So, Daniel, good to have you with us today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Very good. Daniel, I want to start off today with a very neat story that you and I have been talking about, because we've been talking about the governor of Texas for quite a few weeks, because a lot of people in Texas now haven't been too happy with him. But there was a significant meeting yesterday with the committee, the Republican Executive Committee, and they had a vote, and they more or less censored the governor. This is unheard of. I mean, it's very, very unusual. And the other thing is, it was done by somebody who had just joined the executive committee, Rolando Garcia, and they took a vote out of 58 people, 54 voted for the resolution, in a way condemning the governor. They won't call condemning it, but strongly suggesting he get in line with the Texans. So I think this is really significant. You know, it sort of reminds me of my first week or two experience in Washington. The executive committee, the Republican Executive Committee for Texas, had a meeting, and the motion came up to censor me because Ford was the president, and they had a bill in, and lo and behold, the Republicans were doing something that I didn't like, spending money or something like that. So I voted against it, and the Republicans, the establishment Republicans, were just outraged over this. So they had this up to censor me, and one or two of my supporters came to my rescue. The censorship never went through. But it's interesting now. I'm delighted to see Rolando Garcia come to the rescue. And of course, I'm agreeing with this type of censorship, and he's doing it for the right reason. So this is, I think, pretty neat thing to happen. It reminds me, of the slogan for Texas for cleaning up and keeping an environmentally clean highway system. It says, "Don't mess with Texas." So I'm saying this is the executive committee sending a message to our government. Don't mess with Texas. Do what we need to do. Let's clean up the political mess, and let's move this along, because to me, Daniel, I really see this as very good, because we've talked about this for a long time, and getting the people to speak out, and each day we get to report on this. But this is a significant thing for people to get together and have this resolution, and it would just happen. So I think we'll hear more about it. I think it's a very good positive step.
And the one good thing about it, Dr. Paul, is it just shows that it just takes one person. And that person, Garcia, did what other people were thinking, who wanted to, maybe for whatever reason, maybe politics, maybe maybe a lack of courage, maybe other reasons, they didn't do it. So they stepped up, and it's called "No Exceptions, No Delays. Open Texas Now" is a resolution. And the resolve clause calls on Governor Greg Abbott to immediately rescind all COVID-related mandates, closures, and restrictions, and open Texas now. Very, very straightforward, very clear, but it just takes one person with some courage. And if a leader emerges, people will follow, and they'll follow in the right direction.
We were supposed to get some help last week with the governor, and the new resolution, I think, really was just too much for the committee, because he changed it a little bit, and some places got open for 75% capacity. This idea that 73% is bad, 75 is good, 80 we can't, that nonsense that goes on.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is some had 0%. I think it was the bars and different places had 0%. So it just doesn't make any sense. It finally reached a boiling point. And if we don't get more of this, though, because we'll probably mention before this program is over, some place where things are still going in the wrong direction. Some of the headlines are horrible. But I think this should set a standard, and we have to keep at it. And I hope we played a little role in this, little part in it. But it's also, I think, individuals that are waking up. So, the other day we asked and pleaded with our viewers to get hold and write and get involved in this. So maybe just a few of our viewers did it, and we have to stay active. If we just have an opinion, Yes, I like the idea of having strong opinions, and when people like them, they accept them. But there are times when you might have to do a little shouting or a little say, "Hey,
Yeah.
listen, we got to do that." So I think a lot of people in Texas, certainly our viewers, are going to be very pleased to hear this.
Yeah, some shouting and some protesting, but you really point out the issue, which is the inconsistency and the irrationality. Okay, now you can have 75%, but if you put 76, if one extra guy sneaks in the back and has a hamburger, it's all over. There's a funny meme going around, and it's kind of hard to explain memes because they're visual. But one picture, there's a guy in a bar having a glass of beer, and it shows that he's going to get the coronavirus. And the next picture, there's the same guy in the same bar with the beer, but he has a hamburger in front of him, and it says he'll be protected from the coronavirus. So the idea of their restaurant, as long as you serve that burger along with the beer, you're safe, no problem. Take away the burger, got to shut it down. It's too dangerous, and it's so ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense. I wanted to read a couple of statistics today, courtesy of our friend Alex Rodriguez on Twitter, who does such a great job. And this backs up that resolution calling for opening Texas. The hospital census for Texas is down 71.2% since the peak in July 22nd, down 71.2%. The percentage of beds used by the COVID-19 patients is only 5.52%. The hospitals are actually in danger of being too empty. They're going to lose their shirts again because there just aren't any patients, and there's no rationale for keeping things shut down.
Well, I think that's great. And I also see that once again, though, on the other side of this coin, the CDC is flip-flopping again. And this time, maybe a little bit in the right directions. But why I like the resolution from the committee, the executive committee, is it was clear, clean cut, and to the point, and had a principle behind it. But when you pick here and there and say, let's just move it a little bit, let's move it a couple inches, let's just change the percentages or something, that misses the point. That means you can see the principle of the thing. It's just a matter of who's going to manage it and what percent of liberty will be returned to us. But the CDC, here's a headline that I found fascinating. CDC backtracks on warning that coronavirus is airborne. So 2 days ago, they said it was airborne. And now they don't. But I think it's about the third time we've talked about CDC being all over the place. They never come down with the right principle like this resolution does. They just come down back and forth, and who knows. But then they say, well, then they came back, I think, and they said, well, this might be still in draft form. So that just points out, don't trust CDC. Trust the people speaking out through the executive committee. And if anybody knows the address, I bet you could find it. Rolando Garcia, who is just a new member. He's from Houston, and he was just appointed recently. He deserves congratulations. So if anybody can reach him, please send a congratulations note to him and the whole committee. I think they need that congratulated too.
Absolutely, waking up, and these poor people that they own bars and pubs and things. They're losing their shirts, and it's just absurd. But the CDC thing is fascinating. And if you were conspiracy minded, which of course we're not at all, Dr. Paul, but if you were, it's funny. They put this language out saying, "Oh my gosh, it's airborne. It's everywhere. 6 feet distancing doesn't matter. It's going to get you." And then they realized, oh no, we got to backtrack on that. They backtracked and said it was only a draft. But this is interesting, and this is a little bit chilling if you're into this. It says, quote, "We weren't ready to put it up." And it does make you wonder, is this something that they have in their back pocket for when they start opening things up and people start relaxing like they did last time in July, and they said it was a second wave, but it turned out to be a case-demic, not an epidemic? Is this the little quiver they have in their little arrow they have in their quiver ready to pull out when we start going back to the actual normal rather than their own new normal? It does make you kind of scratch your head.
Even with this subtle little movement in the right direction, they also qualified and say, well, this doesn't include choir singing. Choir singing is much too dangerous. And also exercising in close quarters, that's dangerous too, unless you are doing it in a government building. if you belong to a government agency, our gymnasiums are off limits, and anything Pelosi does, even though this is even though it's not supposed to be bipartisan, there's supposed to be a big fight over this. It's very bipartisan. So if you're in the government and you're in the government gymnasium, you get to do it. It's only the people who have to suffer.
Yeah, and I even saw someone saying that they claim that you can't sing "Happy Birthday" because that spreads the germs.
Wow,
that's how it started. We talked about this before the show, and we're making fun of them, and they deserve to be ridiculed. But there is a serious side to the lockdowns that no one is really discussing in an adequate way. And I sent you over an article from a diabetes publication. Did a little bit of research on what's happening to Americans with diabetes because of the lockdowns. And this is serious. It's very serious. I'll read a couple of the statistics for you. 1 in 4 of people with type 1 diabetes in the United States are rationing their insulin. 24% have used their savings for diabetes care. Here's a big one. 650,000 are skipping injections. 3 million are skipping their glucose test. 33% have lost income. And here's per the Wall Street Journal, 10,000 excess diabetes deaths in the United States directly attributable to the lockdown. So you're saving who and at the cost of what, I think is the question.
Yeah, and that's why you can understand why the statistics show now that more people have died from the lockdown than they do from the virus. People do die from the virus, and of course we say it every day. It is serious, and you have to deal with it. But by making things worse and killing other people hardly is an answer to the problem of the virus. It just compounds it. But this knowledge was, it came out earlier that people weren't following their health habits like they should. But this is good evidence. This verifies the suspicions that have gone on. And you can imagine someday, somebody in a year or two, unless we're living under a horrible, horrible type of government, we're going to hear more of these stories, and there will be documentation, and then there will be maybe a subtle concession. Well, maybe we missed that, but we were well intended. And this to me is a very important report that has come out because it documents the fears that we've had.
Yeah, it is. It goes with cancer and heart disease and suicide and everything else. But, this is something interesting, and I mentioned it to you when we were talking earlier, but the Houston Chronicle, which is not really very friendly to Ron Paul or to conservatives in general, they had an interesting article that came out a couple of days ago. Harris County keeps its stay-at-home threat level even as the state of Texas and schools reopen. And this is, Lina Hidalgo, who was one of the first ones that forced people to put their masks on. And now she says she's not going to get Harris County out of code red, which is stay at home, even though basically every one of the metrics that she herself had set up to trigger a reduction in this restriction, they've all been met, essentially. They've all been met, and she still refuses. And she's acting like she's a real hero. She says, I'm trying to do is have at least one level of government that's offering research and numbers-based information and consistently refuses to be swayed by political one-liners, right? So she's a big hero. But, it's her office that we've talked about this on the show before. They had all of these positive tests that they never reported, and they held them in their back pocket, and they reported them weeks and months later. In fact, just a few weeks ago, they finally stopped doing this. But what it did is it made the infection rate in Harris County look much, much higher than it actually was. And it gave her the ammo that she needed to keep Harris County closed, even though the reality was, if you look at hospitalizations and every other objective metric, Harris County was essentially over coronavirus. She did everything she could to make it look worse than it was. So, if there is any justice after this, I hope Lina Hidalgo at least gets fired by the people of Harris County.
We've heard a lot of talk about fake news in the last 3 or 4 years, and there's a lot of fake political news, and it's designed for a lot of political reasons. And a lot of it is very dangerous and very serious. But in this case, what we're talking about is news. They're trying to argue that the false science is actually news, and they're correct. But it is deadly when they do this. If there was a degree of false news, this has to be pretty close to the top of the danger of it, because it literally adds to people dying, all under the pretense that they care about, keeping people alive. Trump has his faults, and he shoots from the hip at times. But for people to get up on a stage, and I think somebody in the opposition campaign said, President Trump is guilty of killing everybody. It's total insanity. The one thing is, that's so outlandish. Maybe the American people will say, well, that's a little bit of overkill. And I think that might be happening now, too, about who's going to be blamed for the violence in the city. The people who defund the police and release people on the street and never arrest anybody who burns down buildings. Maybe the people will wake up. Of course, that's why we like this little resolution, because to us that means somebody looks like they might be waking up and moving in the direction of a little more common sense.
Yeah, who actually said that was Joe Biden. He said the president has killed 200 million Americans.
Right. You think that might be over the top?
A little over the top. I don't think he's helping his cause any. But, we've talked about this before, and I just want to bring it up while we're here on the show. A couple of days ago, the Tennessee Star ran a fascinating article that again backs up the things that we had been reading, which is he wrote that a growing body of research suggests that a significant number of confirmed COVID-19 infections, perhaps as many as 9 out of 10, may not be infectious at all. And that's because of, the way they jiggered these PCR tests. It picks up tiny fragments of viruses, and it triggers a positive result when, in fact, these people are not at all even infectious. So all of the hysteria in the U.S. about these college kids, they're forcing them to get test after test after test. And it's a huge spike. How dare they do this to our university kids? But no one's in the hospital. And I think these phony tests are one reason why. And the other reason why is that young people and healthy people, which tend to be the college age people, they simply don't get these infections. So hopefully more and more of this kind of truth comes out, that this case-demic is not even a case-demic, it's a scam-demic.
Yeah, and those fragments, I think it's a very real thing. And then you find out that there are numerous types of viruses. There's not just this one virus that has fragmentation that might be recorded. So the statistics are fudged and they're misleading. But I think they're impossible. I just don't think they're measuring, even if they were more upfront with this and literally obeyed the rules of using words like cases and deaths and all this more accurately, it would be much better. But they're not even using the correct technology. And the real big question is, are they really, really out of it, or do they really, really have an agenda? And there's probably a lot of both of that. But I do believe there's an agenda. But there was another article I want to mention, Daniel, before we go. And this one says U.S. suffers most new COVID-19 cases in the last 5 weeks as doctors warn of an apocalyptic fall. That's fall season is what they're talking about. And I got to thinking, well, yeah, the influenza virus is coming. So if they've already gotten the thing all filed up and they never can get a vaccine for a corona-type virus, so influenza comes out, what if we're right and there's not going to be that much coronavirus, but the regular influenza season pops up and they just throw it all together? What if they apply all the rules to follow people who get coronavirus to influenza virus? And they'll say, maybe these dissidents are absolutely right. Maybe this influenza is something that we should pay more attention to. I'm frightened to think that what if they apply those rules to influenza? We really have a tragedy on our hands, and I hope I'm absolutely wrong on that. But unless we give up on the dependency and the trust in a bunch of government bureaucrats and a bunch of people who just sort of sell out to a system and they enjoy this, who really work in collusion with the people who want to bring our cities down. So I don't think it's pretty hard to think of coronavirus separate from Antifa and Black Lives Matter and this burning of our cities, and then looking at the economy, what's happening in Europe right now. They're saying, well, you know, the numbers are getting bad. We might even have a depression here before it's all over. And of course there will be. There was one coming anyway. And with the way they're handling this, it is going to compound the problems, whether it's here or in Europe, because so far we haven't gotten enough common sense out there to help us out on these issues.
Yeah, well, I think your fears are well-founded about the fall, because if these people will count suicides and motorcycle accidents as COVID deaths, you can bet your life they're going to count normal influenza deaths as also as COVID deaths. So they probably, I hate to say it this way, can't wait for people to start dying again. But I'm going to say a final word, Dr. Paul, if we're ready to end it here.
Right.
And it's just an anecdote, but I want to try to find something positive at the end. And this might be temporary, but I did notice when I walked in to my local grocery store yesterday, not only was the large banner saying face mask required gone, but there was a small sign in front of the door that indicated face masks were required. That was not there yesterday. So hopefully these grocery stores are waking up, and the people will start waking up, that, you know, despite the fact that the parking lot is littered with disgusting, filthy face masks that people throw on the ground, that these things are not protected, they're not useful, and hopefully the end of this insanity will be coming soon, Dr. Paul.
Right. You know, I think what we're witnessing now is something that's been around a long time, you know, blowing things out of proportion for political gain, for economic gain, doing it out of ignorance. These things do occur. And the big thing is how it becomes like a mob, how it becomes like a panic, and how it becomes a pandemic in the sense of what the social activity is doing. So this hysteria is very real. It's a well-known phenomenon. And it gets out of control because it just spreads. It's like somebody does shout fire at the wrong time, and everybody races for the exits. And people are shouting at people now, and they do recover. But the saying is that the mob drives the hysteria, but the recovery rate is much slower. So that's why we're very joyful when we hear the small corrections and the small bits of common sense coming alive. But I'd like to do our best to accelerate that. That is our goal, to accelerate the fact that common sense is going to help us a lot. Good science will help us, and a lot more liberty will help us, and get rid of the politicians and get them out of the businesses that they shouldn't be in. They shouldn't be involved in religion, for sure. They shouldn't be involved in education, for sure. I think they shouldn't even be involved in medical care. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.